In the buzzing heart of the city sky towers where neon lights shimmered against smooth glass walls and floating shuttles moved in quiet precision lived a young alien named Lyra, who had never truly trusted humans. Her kind spoke softly, walked calmly, painted murals of stars, and dreamt of harmony, but their past held stories of betrayal and war, and the humans were often placed at the center of those tales, even if the war was long over, even if the peace treaties were signed. The old fear still lived in many hearts, especially Lyra's, who had seen her own father hurt during a scuffle with a human officer years ago. The memory etched deep like scars beneath her calm expression. She had been living alone in her modest apartment on the 12th spiral level of the mixed species zone for nearly 3 rotations after her last roommate, a fellow artist from a waterborne species, had moved out to join a creative commune outside the city. Since then the silence had grown heavy. The corners of the apartment slowly forgotten without laughter or shared meals, and eventually Lyra decided to post an ad for a new roommate. Not just any roommate, though the ad was clear in bold-colored text that pulsed softly on the public net board. It read, "Quiet alien preferred. Human applicants will be ignored." She believed in being upfront about her boundaries. The responses came in waves. Most were casual, some odd. A few curious species had sent polite requests, and 1 or 2 aggressive ones had been filtered out automatically, but none felt right either. They were too loud, too messy, too unstable, or simply not her kind of company. After a week of waiting, she almost took the ad down, thinking perhaps silence was better than discomfort. Then one evening, just as the sky turned from gold to deep violet and her room filled with the soft hum of music from her plant speakers, there was a knock on her door, gentle but firm. She wasn't expecting anyone, especially not at this hour, and she paused, hand halfway through painting a pattern of moons on a floating canvas. Another knock came, and she set the brush down, wiping her fingers with a cloth, and walking to the door, her voice calm but alert as she asked who it was. A voice answered, not too loud, not forceful, just a simple, tired-sounding reply, saying his name was Tom, and he had seen the ad and just needed a place for a while. She froze, her thoughts tangled, and she heard that right, a human. The word echoed in her chest, and she nearly turned away from the door, but her curiosity rooted her feet to the floor. Her fingers hovered near the panel, and finally she tapped it open. The door slid aside with a soft whir, and standing there was a tall figure, simple clothes, a bag slung over one shoulder, no weapons, no tech enhancements, just a human with short hair, steady eyes, and an expression that was not eager, not proud, just quiet, like someone who had been turned away too many times. Lyra blinked, her instincts on edge. Every story she knew told her to say no, to close the door and move on, but something about his posture stopped her. He did not try to step in, did not try to smile or charm. His way, he just stood still and said he would not stay long if she did not want him to. He only needed a roof, a few weeks of quiet, and he would be gone. She asked why he came. If the ad clearly said no humans, and he shrugged a little, said he had nowhere else to go, and figured it was worth a try. Maybe someone would see the human before the species, maybe not. Hallway light flickered above them, and the silence stretched long and strange. Lyra could feel her neighbors' eyes behind their doors, sensors clicking as they recorded or watched or simply listened, and she wondered what they would say if she let him in, what they would think if they saw her open her home to a species she had once feared, without knowing deeply, without understanding. She studied him again. His shoes were worn, his jacket had a rip at the shoulder, but his hands were clean, and his eyes steady. No trace of the aggression she had been taught to expect. No smugness, no cold distance, just tired patience. Fingers hovered again near the panel to close the door, but instead they moved toward the side, and she stepped back just a little, just enough for him to understand. It was not a yes, not yet, but not a no either. Nodded once, and stepped in slowly, respectfully, stopping just past the threshold. He looked around the small living space, with the floating shelves filled with books and glass plants, the flickering art screen showing stars across the ceiling, and the soft scent of steamed herbs in the air. Lyra moved past him, quietly gestured toward the spare room, and told him it would be temporary, 1 week, no promises. He agreed simply, and set his bag down in the corner without opening it. He asked no questions, did not try to start conversation, just said thank you, and sat on the edge of the small floor-cushioned bed. She returned to her canvas in the other room, her mind still full of questions, her chest a tangle of uncertainty and thoughts of old stories. But even as her brush moved across the sky tones of her painting, she found her strokes were not sharp, not disturbed, but soft and slow, like her mind was trying to understand something new, like her heart was wondering what it meant to make space for what once felt impossible. That night, as the sky outside turned to deep blue and stars blinked in the glass dome above the city, Lyra lay in her bed, eyes open, her thoughts replaying the quiet knock, the human's steady voice, the calm way he entered, and for the first time in many nights, the silence in the apartment did not feel so heavy. It felt curious, it felt unknown, it felt like something had shifted. She did not know what tomorrow would bring, but for now she let the thought drift and decided she would watch and listen and maybe even learn something she had never allowed herself to see before. The first morning felt strange for Lyra. She woke up earlier than usual, her senses alert, as if her body knew something unfamiliar now existed inside the walls of her home. The air felt different, not tense, not dangerous, but different. She moved quietly to the kitchen, her feet brushing the soft floor panels, and found the human already awake, sitting at the small table with a cup of steamed fruit tea in his hands. He looked up when she entered, nodded a silent greeting, and looked back down, not speaking unless spoken to. Lyra poured her own cup and sat on the opposite end of the table, her eyes watching him closely, though she pretended not to. His presence was still a weight in the air, not heavy, just unfamiliar, and she tried to read him without asking anything. He had made no mess, left no strange smell or noise. The apartment remained just as she liked it, clean, calm, and silent. But his being there shifted the balance, and she did not know if she liked that or hated it. Went through the day like two ghosts drifting in separate circles inside the same space. Tom spent most of his time in the small room, unpacking only a few things: a datapad, a worn notebook, some old photos, which Lyra noticed when she passed by and glanced through the half-open door. He did not play music, did not take long showers, or fill the air with the scent of chemical sprays like her previous tenant. Instead, he read, cooked simple meals, or stared out the window at the floating traffic and shining spires. Beyond, at night, Lyra kept one ear tuned to his movements, but there was never a sound out of place. No footsteps past the boundary of the shared space, no intrusion into her privacy. He respected the walls and the silence, and in a strange way that unsettled her more than anything, because it made her question what she had been told, what she had believed for so long. By the third day, a small crack formed in the wall between them. It happened in the kitchen again, where most unspoken things found their way to the surface. Lyra was trying to fix the cooling unit, which had started humming too loudly, its circuits overheating from poor maintenance. She struggled with the wiring, her fingers not trained for repairs, when Tom stepped in, saw her struggle, and asked gently if she needed help. She almost said no, but stopped herself. Something in his voice was not forceful, not arrogant, just quietly concerned. She stepped aside reluctantly and watched as he knelt, opened the panel, and with surprising care began adjusting the wires, his hands steady, his eyes focused. He explained what he was doing in simple words, not to show off, but to keep her included, as if he wanted her to understand, not to feel left out. When the unit settled into a low calm, and the noise disappeared, she realized he had done something she could not, and instead of feeling threatened, she felt strangely thankful. Later that evening, they shared a meal at the table, for the first time, not planned, not spoken, but it happened naturally. He had made something from basic rations, mixed with herbs from her kitchen, and though she doubted it would taste right, it surprised her how balanced it was. She asked where he learned, and he smiled just a little and said he used to cook for his younger brother, who liked alien flavors more than human ones. Lyra did not know how to respond to that, so she just nodded and took Another bite outside the city, lights blinked in long rows across the horizon, and a low storm cloud passed over the dome, filters casting strange shadows inside the apartment. And in that soft quiet moment, Lyra asked him why he had no family here, no friends, no one to stay with, and he answered slowly, as if choosing each word with care. He said he used to live in one of the outer zones, but after the unrest, humans were not welcome there anymore. People he had known for years stopped answering his calls. His own neighbors turned cold, even his old boss let him go without explanation, and the only place left was wherever someone would let him stay, even if just for a short time. Lyra listened, without interrupting, her eyes watching the curve of his face, the line of weariness near his eyes, the way his voice carried no anger, just a quiet sadness. And for the first time, she felt the shape of his story and realized it was not too different from hers in the way pain lingers and trust takes time to grow. The next day she noticed him fixing the panel near the shower that had been flickering for weeks without her having the time to address it. She said nothing but left a small packet of fruit near his door. Not a gift, not a thank you, just something that spoke. When words felt too much, he accepted it without comment, but she saw him smile faintly when he picked it up, and she felt something strange in her chest, a soft pull, like wind brushing the edge of a closed window. Their neighbors had started to notice too. A few odd glances in the hallway, a whisper or two in the lift chamber. Lyra caught the gaze of the wind vendor across the corridor, who looked at her with disbelief and maybe even disappointment, as if she had betrayed some unspoken rule of the building, that aliens must stay among aliens and humans stay far away. But she turned away from those looks. She kept her steps steady and her expression calm, even when her thoughts were not. One evening, the lights failed across the level, a sudden blackout caused by a circuit overload, and the apartment dropped into complete silence. Only the soft pulse of emergency panels casting pale blue glows through the hallways. Lyra sat near the window, her body still, her mind alert, when Tom entered holding 2 thermal blankets and a soft light cube she placed between them. They sat on the floor without speaking for a while, wrapped in quiet, not tension, just stillness. The kind that comes when 2 people no longer feel like strangers, not quite friends, but not strangers either. And then Tom spoke low and thoughtful, saying he missed the stars back on his homeworld, how they used to shine without the dome, how he used to lie on the roof as a boy counting them with his brother. And she listened, really listened, and felt herself drawn into his memory as if it was hers. When he asked her what her homeworld was like, she told him, not with words, but by drawing it in the air using light ink, her fingers shaping the great blue waterfalls, the twin suns, the trees that grew like spirals. And he watched silently, eyes wide, like a child seeing color for the first time. And in that moment, something passed between them, not a spark, not a bond, just a small thread of something forming slowly, quietly, patiently. And when the lights returned and the normal hum returned to the building, they did not rush to stand or walk away. They remained for a few more minutes in the soft afterglow of shared space and mutual silence. And though Lyra said nothing when she rose and returned to her room, her thoughts moved like rivers flowing past old stones and forming new paths through the landscape of her understanding. Days passed and something began to shift, not with loud noise or sudden moments, but with quiet actions that left soft impressions like footsteps on untouched sand. Lyra found herself watching Tom more closely, not out of fear, not even out of suspicion, but with a growing curiosity that came without warning, like rain that begins while the sky still looks clear. He moved with the same calm presence each morning, making tea, fixing small things, reading silently in corners of the apartment she had rarely used before. And without asking, he had begun to take care of things. The kitchen's water stream had been leaking for weeks before he arrived, and one afternoon she came back to find it working perfectly, its sensors flowing in smooth, steady rhythm again. She asked him how he managed to fix it when the parts were obsolete, and he told her he had combined spare pieces from different tech generations, using an old trick he learned during a job on a frontier station. His voice was humble and casual as if such things were not impressive, but to her it felt like seeing someone solve a puzzle without even looking at the pieces. Lyra started to speak more often, sometimes during breakfast, sometimes while folding the laundry. They spoke about small things, the difference between human music and alien tones, how language shifts in space, how cities grow faster than the trees she missed from home, and each time she found herself relaxing a little more, letting her voice fill the air. Without the usual caution that came with speaking to outsiders, Tom listened with the kind of attention that made her feel seen, not just heard. He never interrupted, never tried to sound smarter or correct her stories. He laughed at her jokes, even the dry ones, and one evening he brought home a strange box of preserved ingredients and asked if she could teach him how to cook her favorite meal. She was hesitant at first, but something in his request felt genuine, and she agreed. They spent hours in the kitchen with flour on the counters and spice dust in the air. She showed him how to fold the leaf wraps and which sequence the roots had to be boiled in. And though he got it wrong more than once, he never gave up, and by the end the dish was not perfect, but it tasted like home. That night something changed in the way she looked at him, not just as a roommate or a guest, but as someone who had walked into her world and, instead of breaking it, had chosen to learn its shape and honor its rhythm. And in return, she began to learn the subtle ways he tried to hide his loneliness, how he sat a little longer at the window after messages from old friends remained unread, how he sometimes stared at the photos he kept tucked in his bag as if trying to hold on to memories before they faded too far. Neighborhood around them, however, was not as willing to understand the change. Whispers had started to grow like weeds between cracks in the walls. Lyra noticed the stairs becoming longer, the greetings colder. A few neighbors stopped responding when she nodded in the hallway, and even the old fruit vendor who used to offer her extra slices now turned away when Tom was near. But she said nothing about it, and neither did he. Instead, they shared silent glances that spoke of things neither wanted to put into words. It was during one of those quiet evenings when the peace shattered in a way Lyra had never expected. They were returning from the market, arms full of supplies, when they crossed the lower corridor that led to their level. The hallway was dim and mostly empty until a group stepped out from behind the support beams. 4 aliens of different species, their expressions sharp and cold, their eyes locked on Tom. They did not speak at first, only moved closer in slow, threatening steps, and Lyra felt her heartbeat rise, a wall of heat building in her chest. Tom stood calmly beside her, his voice low and steady as he asked what they wanted. The tallest of the group sneered and said humans had no place in their building, no place in their space, no right to walk freely where they were not welcome. Lyra stepped forward, her voice firm, but not loud, saying he was her guest, her roommate, her choice, and they had no right to speak for her home. But the words only added to their anger, and one of them pushed Tom back hard enough to make him stumble. She saw his eyes flash not with rage but with restraint as he stepped between her and the group, his hands open, showing he did not want to fight. They laughed, called him weak, but he did not move, did not strike back, and when one raised a fist, he blocked it with his arm, took the hit, and stood his ground. Lyra shouted for help, but no one came. The corridor remained silent, the doors around them tightly shut. Tom's lip was bleeding, his shoulder bruised, but he kept standing, eyes never leaving theirs, and something about that stillness, something about his refusal to hurt them back, made the group pause just long enough for Lyra to pull him away. They walked back slowly, bruised and shaken, but together, and when the door to their apartment closed behind them, the silence was no longer empty. It was full of unspoken weight. Lyra brought a cloth and gently cleaned the cut on his face, her hands moving without words as Tom sat still, letting her do what she could. And for the first time, she called him friend, not loudly, not dramatically, just a simple word spoken softly between 2 breaths. And Tom looked at her not with surprise, but with quiet understanding, like he had been waiting to hear that, without ever asking for it. The stars blinked outside their window that night, and though the city remained full of tension and shadows, the apartment felt warmer, like a fire had been lit, not with flame, but with trust. And somewhere inside her, Lyra realized the walls she had built so carefully were starting to fall, not because she had lost anything, but because something better had started to grow. In their place, something that felt like change, something that felt like hope. Morning light entered the apartment with soft gold rays sliding across the floor, touching the corners of shelves and curling around the edges of the kitchen walls. Lyra stood near the window holding a warm cup in both hands, her thoughts drifting like dust through sunlight. She could still see the bruises on Tom's arm, though they had started to fade, the memory of that night still fresh in her mind like a scene, playing again and again. No matter how much she tried to move past it, things had become quieter after the hallway incident. Not in the apartment, but outside, the neighbors had stopped speaking altogether. The fruit vendor no longer made eye contact. Two of the council drones had hovered near their door for longer than usual, and Lyra had noticed small warning signals blinking near the apartment's identity register. It was not a good sign, and deep inside, she knew something was coming, something bigger than words or glances. Later that day, while Tom was out gathering supplies, Lyra received a message from the building council. It came as a soft chime, followed by a formal voice that announced the content without emotion, stating clearly that her housing agreement had been flagged for violation. The terms of residency under their building's legacy charter restricted human tenants, and her registration now showed unauthorized cohabitation with one. Her hands went cold as she listened. The message continued, stating that if she did not resolve the issue by removing the human occupant, she would face termination of lease and forced removal from the unit. The message ended with a polite reminder of historical tensions and the need to preserve building harmony, but every word sounded like a cage closing around her. When Tom returned, she did not tell him at first. She watched him quietly as he placed groceries on the counter, asked about her day, and mentioned the weather towers adjusting the dome's filter settings to a softer hue. It was all so normal, so quiet, and she hated the weight in her chest, the storm of thoughts that kept crashing through her mind. That evening, when the sun dipped below the tall towers and the lights of the city turned into soft pulses across the sky, she finally told him, her voice low, steady, but heavy with meaning. He listened without interrupting, without reacting, just nodding slowly and asking what she planned to do. His eyes not angry, not sad, just prepared, as if he had expected something like this to happen sooner or later. Lyra told him she would fight it, that she would speak to the council, explain everything. But Tom stopped her gently, saying it was not worth losing her home, her peace, her life just for him. He said he could pack and leave by morning, find another place, another corner of the city, where maybe someone else would take him in, even for a little while. His words made her angry, not because of what he said, but because of how easily he said it, like he had grown used to leaving, like he had learned to accept being pushed out without question. She told him she did not take him in as a favor, and she would not send him away out of fear. She reminded him that her name was on the lease, but the apartment felt like theirs now, a shared space made alive not just by presence but by care and connection, and that mattered more than any contract. Tom looked at her in silence, then said thank you, not loudly, just enough for her to hear it in her chest. And they sat in that stillness for a while, until the night began to speak in distant echoes from outside. The first sign was the sound of voices, not joyful, not playful, but tense, sharp words carried through the hallway cracks. A growing crowd forming below in the communal space. Lyra opened the window slightly and saw the group forming. A mix of angry faces and flashing signals, protests rising against the new human presence in the neighborhood, drones flying overhead, recording, watching, waiting, and the fear crept in slowly, because it was no longer just about them. It was becoming bigger, something that could not be stopped with a conversation or a quiet agreement. Tom closed the window, gently pulled the shades down, and told her to stay away from the crowd. He said he would leave before things got worse, before anyone got hurt. But Lyra refused again, standing firm by the door, her voice clear as she told him they started this together, and they would face it together. She was not going to hide behind walls while he faced their judgment alone as the crowd grew louder aloud. Crash echoed through the hallway, followed by footsteps running past their door. The building was no longer safe, not just for Tom but for anyone who chose peace over fear. Lyra sent a message to the local broadcast station, attaching images of Tom helping her rebuild parts of the apartment, sharing meals, learning culture, fixing systems without asking anything in return. She also included the footage from the hallway attack, which she had saved from her internal home scanner, and sent it directly to the council drone above their block, the truth recorded, without bias, showing Tom shielding her without violence, showing restraint where others chose anger. The hours stretched long into the night with sirens echoing in the background, drones moving across rooftops and voices shouting in languages she could not fully understand, and in the middle of it all, she and Tom sat together by the kitchen table, their hands close but not touching, their eyes meeting in silent strength, waiting for morning, waiting for change. Lyra did not know what would happen next. She did not know if the council would listen, or if the neighbors would stop their anger, but she knew she would not walk back on her choice. She had seen enough in Tom to know what mattered, and no outdated rule, no buried prejudice was going to erase that truth from her heart or her home. And so they waited side by side with the lights dimmed and hope, holding on even through the darkest part of the night. The city awoke beneath a quiet sky. The usual flicker of morning signals seemed slower, and even the hum of the shuttles passing overhead carried a different weight, as if the air itself held its breath. Lyra stood by the window watching the courtyard below, where the remnants of the previous night's unrest still lingered, shattered display lights, broken message boards, scattered belongings from neighbors who had rushed inside when the situation grew tense. And yet in all that mess, something was rising, not anger, not anymore, but attention, awareness, the kind that comes after people see more than they expected. Tom sat near the door, lacing his boots, preparing for something neither of them had planned. He had barely spoken since dawn, only offering her a cup of tea and a small nod when their eyes met. But Lyra knew what he was thinking. She could feel it in the way his shoulders held. Tension, not fear, not regret, just readiness, like he was prepared to leave before anything fell apart again. But the universe had its own timing, and before he could stand fully, a sharp knock echoed against their door. This time it was not a stranger, not an angry neighbor, but a council officer, accompanied by a monitor drone, both standing straight, both watching without emotion. They asked for Tom, not rudely, not with force, just with protocol, and when he stepped forward, Lyra followed without question. The officer did not stop her, instead motioned for both of them to come down to the communal hall, where the building's residents had gathered already, rows of faces mixed with curiosity, doubt, discomfort, and something that felt close to shame. A large projection filled the back wall, and Lyra recognized the footage. It was from her own camera, the moment Tom had stood in the hallway, arms raised, trying to shield her from the attack, his voice calm, his movements nonviolent. The crowd watched as the footage played again, followed by clips from a neighbor's camera showing Tom weeks before fixing broken stair rails, assisting an old alien carrying heavy supplies, even teaching a young child how to use the recycling hatch safely. The silence that followed was longer than anyone expected. No one moved, no one spoke. And then from the side of the room, an elderly alien slowly stepped forward, her voice soft but firm, as she said she had misjudged. She had seen fear but not the actions, and now she saw what was true. Others joined, one by one, a voice from the back, admitting they had avoided Lyra out of habit, not hate. A shopkeeper stepped forward, saying he had told stories about humans that were not his to tell, but had been passed to him without being questioned. Then came a message that changed everything, a live feed from the Central Peace Council of the city, showing the footage across public channels with a caption that read, "This is what unity looks like, a single human, a single alien facing fear without returning it, choosing kindness over anger." And in that moment, Tom did not say anything. He just turned to Lyra, his eyes wide, not with pride, but with disbelief, like he could not believe he was being really seen for the first time. Building council responded by halting the eviction process, not just for Lyra and Tom, but for the entire legacy rulebook that restricted mixed species living within the city. The announcement came fast, clear, and official, as the officer declared that the outdated charter would be reviewed and replaced. Effective immediately, Lyra looked around and saw faces changing, not suddenly, not all at once, but in small ways, softened expressions, nods of apology, short words of support, cautious but sincere. By the end of the day, things began to shift. Neighbors brought small gestures, a basket of fruit, an old repair kit, a fresh data chip loaded with neutral entertainment, as if trying to say, "We may not have understood before, but we are willing to learn now." Lyra and Tom returned to their apartment with quiet steps and slow hearts. The room felt the same and yet entirely new, as if the walls had let go of something they had been holding too long. Later that evening they sat on the rooftop, not speaking for a while, just watching the sky above, where stars now blinked through the dome filters. Clean and clear and honest. Tom leaned back, resting his head against the wall, his voice low as he asked if she ever thought it would turn out this way, and Lyra shook her head, saying not even once, not in her wildest dreams. But now that it had, she felt something rare, something she had never truly trusted before. She felt hope. She turned to him, holding a small data pad in her hands, the same one she had used to post the original roommate ad. And with a soft smile she opened the listing and edited the title, removing the words she once thought would keep her safe, words that once drew a line between her and the unknown, and in their place, she typed slowly, carefully, with meaning that reached far beyond the screen, looking for a roommate species. Not important. Kindness required. Tom laughed quietly at the screen, not in mockery, but in understanding, and Lyra smiled with him, not because everything was perfect, not because the world had fixed itself overnight, but because for the first time in a long time she had chosen something without fear, and that choice had been met not with pain but with possibility. They sat there until the stars faded into morning, their shared silence, holding a story neither of them needed to tell anymore, because now the whole world could see it in the way they lived, in the way they stayed, and in the way they refused to turn away from what was right. The city moved on around them, buildings humming, roads clearing, skies warming, but in that one rooftop corner of a tall shared tower, a human and an alien sat together, knowing they had changed more than just each other. They had changed what others believed was possible, and that change would echo far beyond the walls of their small apartment for many days to come. The end.